Keanu Reeves sat quietly on the wooden bench outside the courtroom. The sun was hiding behind thick clouds, but sweat still formed on his forehead. His fingers drummed against his knee, restless, but his eyes stayed calm. Behind those eyes was a storm he had carried for years, a story that was never supposed to be told. But today, he was going to tell it. Inside, reporters waited like hungry wolves. They whispered to each other, pointing at him through the glass doors. For so long, Keanu had kept his life private, away from the lights, the noise, the greed. He had always been the quiet one, the humble one, the kind soul in Hollywood who never chased the spotlight. But the truth had claws. It scratched at his heart every night he lay awake, wondering if he should speak or stay silent forever. It all began one night, many years ago, when Keanu was at a private party hosted by Diddy. He didn't want to go. He never liked big parties. But a friend insisted, saying it would help Keanu's career to mingle with the right people. Back then, he was still finding his way. He didn't want fame for power. He just wanted to make movies that meant something. The house was huge, hidden behind tall gates, full of gold and expensive furniture. Music was loud. People danced, laughed, whispered secrets. Keanu felt out of place from the moment he stepped inside. But then Diddy came over, all smiles and charm, and pulled him aside. Diddy led him to a quiet room at the back. It was a bathroom, bigger than most apartments, marble floors, a giant tub filled with warm water and flower petals floating on top. Candles burned everywhere, their flames flickering like tiny spirits. Keanu looked confused. Why were they here? Diddy sat on the edge of the tub, his face serious. He leaned forward and told Keanu he had an offer, a strange ritual that would bind them as brothers. Keanu's stomach turned. He asked what Diddy meant. Then came the words Keanu would never forget. Diddy told him he wanted Keanu to bathe in his used water that Diddy had just stepped out of. He said it was about trust, loyalty, and cleansing the old self to welcome in the new. Keanu felt sick. He laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But Diddy's eyes were cold and sharp. It wasn't a joke. That night, Keanu said no. He walked out, heart pounding, fear crawling up his spine. Diddy didn't stop him. He just smiled and said, "One day, you'll come back." They all do. Keanu didn't look back. He went home, locked the door, and sat in the dark, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. For years, he kept it inside. He watched other people fall into that circle, people who gave up their peace for power. He chose the quiet path. He worked harder, stayed humble, helped strangers, gave away millions without telling anyone. People called him generous, an angel, but they didn't know the secret that burned inside him every day. Now, in this courtroom, he was ready, not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted freedom. He wanted people to see that even the kindest faces could hide darkness behind their smiles. He wanted young actors, struggling musicians, dreamers with empty pockets, to know they didn't have to sell their souls. They could say no. They could walk away, just like he did. When the doors opened, Keanu took a deep breath and stepped inside. Cameras flashed, voices rose. He sat down, faced the judge, and began his story. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of every sleepless night, every tear he had shed alone. "I never wanted this," he said, his eyes looking straight into the crowd. "But silence is a prison. And today, I break out." In that moment, you could feel the shift in the room, a heavy truth, so raw, so real. It made even the coldest hearts stop and listen. The world thought they knew Keanu Reeves. Today, they would see the man behind the movies, a man who chose respect, humility, and kindness over power, even when the price was high. But what happened next, nobody could have seen coming. Not even Keanu. As Keanu sat there, his hands resting on the table in front of him. He could feel every camera lens pointing at him like a weapon. The judge, a woman with tired eyes but a strong voice, asked him to continue. She reminded him that every word he spoke would be on record forever. Keanu nodded. He knew there was no turning back now. He took a sip of water. His fingers shook slightly. He looked out across the room, scanning the sea of faces. Some were curious, Some were judgmental, some were hoping for dirt, for gossip, for scandal. But there were also young faces in the back, new actors who had come just to see if he would really do it. He saw the fear in their eyes, the same fear he once felt when he was alone in that marble bathroom. Keanu's voice was steady as he spoke. He told them about how that night haunted him for years, every big job offer he got, every handshake with a producer. He wondered, was this connected? Was there a price he didn't see yet? Sometimes he felt like there were eyes on him everywhere. He would see Diddy at events, surrounded by people, laughing and whispering. Diddy would smile at him, but that smile was cold, like a knife. One night, Keanu found a note slipped under his door. No name, just a message, "You'll come back." "You always do." He didn't sleep that night. He thought about leaving Hollywood, moving somewhere no one knew him, changing his name, starting over. But he couldn't run forever. Instead, he stayed. He chose his projects carefully, avoided the parties, the secret clubs, the whispers in dark corners. He stayed busy, hoping the noise of his work would drown out the memories. He looked up at the judge and paused. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Keanu spoke again, his words like slow thunder. "Rolling in, I learned that darkness hides behind pretty things, behind big houses, fancy cars, expensive suits. People think they're safe when they smile for the cameras, but some of them are prisoners. They wear invisible chains. I saw friends who laughed with me at lunch break down behind closed doors. I saw young artists lose their spark because they thought they had no choice but to say yes." Keanu's eyes became wet, but he didn't wipe the tears away. He wanted them to see it, the raw truth. He told them about one friend, a singer who once opened for Diddy at a private show. That friend called Keanu in the middle of the night, crying, saying he did the ritual, that he felt empty inside, like he had traded something he could never get back. A few months later, that friend was gone. They called it an accident, but Keanu knew the weight that took him away. Someone in the audience gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously, but Keanu kept going. He talked about the rumors that spread about him. People said he was difficult, that he was cold, that he didn't belong at their parties. But he didn't care. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who still had his soul. That was worth more than any role, any award, any handshake. Then, suddenly, the courtroom doors swung open. Everyone turned. In walked a tall man in a gray suit and dark glasses. He moved like he owned the room. Behind him, two more men followed, their faces hidden behind hats. They sat down in the back row, their eyes locked on Keanu. A chill spread through the room. Keanu recognized one of them. He hadn't seen him in years, but he remembered that face from the party, one of Diddy's closest men. The judge asked if Keanu wanted to stop. He shook his head. He knew they were here to scare him, to make him change his story. But he wasn't that young, scared man anymore. He had lived through heartbreak, loss, loneliness, and he was still standing. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," Keanu said, his voice rising, strong now. "I'm here to protect those who come after me. I'm here to say that you don't have to give up your soul. You don't have to bow down to darkness. You can walk away, even if it costs you everything, because what you keep, your kindness, your peace, your self-respect, is worth more than gold." The room fell into a stunned silence. The judge called for a short break, but no one moved. Keanu leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath, and felt a tiny piece of the heavy chain around his heart break free. But deep down, he knew the fight was only beginning. The men in the back row were already making calls. They wouldn't let him speak so freely without consequences. Keanu could feel it. The storm was coming, and he was ready to face it, no matter what it would cost him. The courtroom emptied for the break, but Keanu stayed seated. He could feel their eyes burning holes into his back, the men in gray suits who came in late. He knew they were not just there to watch, they were there to remind him of the cost of telling the truth. He closed his eyes for a moment and let his mind drift to the past, searching for strength in the memories that still made him human. He remembered his mother's small kitchen, the smell of coffee, her soft voice telling him when he was a boy, "Kindness is your armor, Keanu." Never let the world take it away. That memory gave him courage. It wrapped around his tired heart. Like a blanket, when the judge returned, the room filled again, more crowded than before. People had heard. News spreads fast when it carries the scent of secrets and power. Even outside, cameras and microphones waited. But inside, the air was thick with fear and something else, hope. Some people wanted him to fail, but some were rooting for him. Keanu adjusted the mic in front of him. His eyes drifted to the men in the back row. One of them whispered something into his phone. Keanu knew what that meant. Stories would come out, half-truths twisted into lies. They would call him unstable, bitter, desperate for attention. They would drag his name through the mud. But he was ready. The judge asked him to continue. He cleared his throat and spoke of the night he walked out of that marble bathroom. He told them how, on his way out, Diddy's voice followed him like a shadow. One day, you'll come back. You all come back. Keanu never forgot that chill in his spine. It stayed with him every time he stepped onto a new film set, every time he signed a contract. But the darkness didn't stop at that party. Keanu shared how, over the years, offers would come in from people connected to that circle. Special deals, they called them. Private meetings, secret gatherings. Offers of money so big they made his head spin. But always there was a price. They wanted him to bend, to join them, to become one of them. He refused. Every time he said no, they tightened their grip in other ways. Roles slipped away. Rumors grew. Keanu's voice trembled slightly when he spoke about the people who didn't make it out. He told the story of Marissa, a young actress he once met on set. She was full of dreams and light. He warned her, told her to stay away from certain people, but she was hungry for a break, for fame, for a piece of the dream they all chased. One day, she went to one of those parties. She came back different, hollow, like a candle with no flame. Months later, she was gone. They said overdose, but Keanu knew it was more than that. It was the darkness that ate her soul. The courtroom listened, hanging on every word. Some people looked away, unable to face the ugly truth that hid behind red carpets and movie screens. Others leaned in closer, drawn by the courage it took to speak. Then, the men in gray suits stood up. They walked out, whispering into their phones again. Keanu knew what that meant. Outside this building, there were people waiting to destroy him. But he also saw something in the eyes of the young actors in the back row, something that made every risk worth it. They were seeing a different kind of hero. Not the one on the screen, but the one who stood up when it was hardest to stand. A lawyer for Diddy's team stood up to cross-examine Keanu. He was smooth, sharp, every word chosen like a blade. He asked Keanu if he had any proof, any recordings, any witnesses. He tried to twist Keanu's words, paint him as confused, bitter, old. Keanu listened calmly, nodding, his hands folded. When the lawyer finished, Keanu leaned in and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes proof isn't a paper or a photo. Sometimes it's the scars you carry alone. Sometimes it's the truth you see when you look in the mirror and know you didn't break. The lawyer smirked. The judge asked for order. Keanu sat back, heart pounding, but he felt lighter than he had in years. He had spoken the words that needed to be spoken. He had cracked the door open, and now there was no closing it. But as the judge called for another break, Keanu's phone buzzed on the table. A message popped up from an unknown number. It said, "Stop now, you're next." Keanu's eyes didn't flinch. He knew the darkness wouldn't go down without a fight. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning, and that gave him hope. Keanu sat still, staring at the message on his phone screen. "Stop now. You're next." The words glowed in the dim light of the courtroom, sharp and cold like ice pressed against his skin. But instead of fear, Keanu felt something else inside him, a quiet fire, small but steady. He had felt fear before. He had spent years swallowing it, locking it away in the darkest parts of his mind. But now it was turning into something stronger. He slipped the phone into his pocket. His eyes wandered to the windows where sunlight struggled to break through gray clouds. He thought about how many nights he had stayed awake, wondering if he should bury this story forever. Now, he knew he couldn't. Maybe he would lose everything. Maybe they would drag his name through every dirty headline. But maybe, just maybe, his voice would plant a seed in someone's heart. A seed that said, "You can say no. You can walk away." The judge returned, and the courtroom filled again. The lawyer for Diddy's team leaned over, whispering to another man in a dark suit. They looked worried, but they hid it behind fake smiles. The young actors in the back row sat straighter when Keanu lifted his head. They needed him to finish what he started. The judge asked Keanu if he was ready to continue. Keanu's voice was calm but firm. He spoke about what happened after he walked away from the bathroom that night. He shared how people started avoiding him quietly, how invitations dried up, how producers pulled him aside on sets and told him to just play along, don't make enemies. "Keanu, this is Hollywood." He told the room how sometimes being alone felt like drowning in slow motion, nights when he questioned if he had made the right choice. But he reminded himself that the cost of silence would have been his soul, and that was too high a price. Keanu single quotes S eyes moved to the jury box, where a young woman sat holding back tears. Maybe she knew someone who had fallen for the same lies. Maybe she had seen it up close, how a person could be smiling one day, then lost the next. Then came the part of his story that hurt him the most. He spoke about a young man named Jesse. Jesse was a stunt double on one of Keanu's films. Full of life, always joking, always dreaming about his first big break. Keanu took him under his wing like a little brother. One night after a shoot, Jesse told Keanu he had been invited to a private party at a mansion in the hills. Jesse was excited. "This is it, man, my shot." Keanu begged him not to go. He saw the pattern. He knew how these parties worked, but Jesse was too young, too hopeful. He went anyway. When he came back the next day, he was different. He wouldn't look Keanu in the eyes. He stopped talking about his dreams. Weeks later, Jesse disappeared. They found him days later, in a hotel room, alone. They said he overdosed. Keanu knew it was more than that. The darkness had taken him to as Keanu spoke. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. People shifted uncomfortably, their eyes cast down. It was one thing to read rumors on gossip sites. It was another to hear the pain in a man's voice as he spoke the names of the people who didn't survive the game. The lawyer for Diddy stood up again, trying to cut Keanu off. "Objection, Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with false confidence. "This is all hearsay. He has no evidence, no recordings, no signed confessions, just stories." Keanu turned to the lawyer. His voice didn't shake. "Sometimes the stories are the only thing left. Sometimes the truth lives in the spaces you can't see. I have no reason to lie. I have nothing to gain. I could have stayed silent and lived my life in peace. But silence is how they win." The judge overruled the objection. The lawyer sat down, his face tight with anger. The men in gray suits had left the courtroom now, but Keanu could feel their presence like a storm waiting outside. He knew there would be consequences, calls, threats, maybe worse, but he had made peace with that. Just then, a young woman in the back row stood up. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked as she asked the judge if she could speak. She said she had a story too, about a party she went to when she was 19, about the people she saw there, about how they made her feel like nothing more than a pawn in their game. Keanu watched her with gentle eyes. She was proof that his words were seeds. They were already taking root. The judge allowed her to speak. The room shifted. Now it wasn't just about Keanu's story. Now it was about all the voices that had been buried under fear and shame. One by one, more people stood up. Each voice added weight to the truth. Each story made the darkness crack just a little bit more. Keanu sat back in his chair, exhausted but lighter. For the first time in years, he felt like he was breathing real air, not just surviving. But deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. This was only the spark. The fire would come next, and he had to be ready to face it. Keanu felt the tremble in his bones as he watched more people stand up, one by one. The judge tried to keep order, but it was impossible. The courtroom that once felt cold and stiff was now alive, with voices that had been silent for too long. Some were soft, shaking with fear. Some were loud, cracking like thunder. But each word carried weight. The young woman who spoke first wiped tears from her eyes as she told how she was promised fame, a record deal, a better life. All she had to do was trust the wrong people. She spoke about the night she sat on the edge of a marble tub, like the one Keanu described. She felt trapped, frozen. She had done things she could never speak about again. Her voice broke, but she forced the words out, because Keanu had Keanu's single quotes. Eyes met hers. He gave her the smallest nod, and somehow that made her stand taller, her voice steadier. For years, she thought no one would ever believe her. But now, the truth was growing bigger than any lie they could spin. When she finished, a man in his 50s stood up. He was shaking so much that he leaned on the pew for balance. He was once a bodyguard, he said. He saw things that made his stomach twist. Young people led into back rooms, deals whispered behind closed doors, envelopes of money passed like secrets. He had carried the weight for decades, telling himself to keep quiet so he could protect his family. But his silence had become poison, eating him from the inside. People listened, some in shock, some in pain, some ready to deny everything just to protect what they thought was safe. But truth has a way of spreading, like a crack in glass that keeps growing until the whole window shatters. The judge finally had to call for a break to calm the room. The bailiff asked people to step outside, to breathe, to remember that this was a court, not a riot. But Keanu knew it wasn't just a court anymore. It was a battlefield. He sat alone, the wooden bench pressing into his back. His lawyer leaned in, whispering, "You know they'll come after you now, harder than before. They're not going to let you walk out of here free, Keanu. They'll twist everything." Keanu nodded. He expected it. He wasn't a fool. He knew the shadows that waited beyond the courtroom walls. Rumors would start before he even stepped outside. Tabloids would say he was lying for attention. Old footage would be dug up and twisted to make him look unstable. People he thought were friends might turn their backs just to save their own skin. But then he thought about Jesse, about Marissa, about the nameless faces who were gone because they thought they had no choice. He thought about the young actors sitting in the back, wide-eyed, holding onto his every word like it was a life raft. He couldn't stop now. He wouldn't. The judge returned and asked Keanu if he wanted to rest his case. He looked down at his notes, pages filled with scribbled thoughts, names he would never forget, nights that haunted him still. He could have stayed quiet about so much, but staying quiet is what let the darkness grow so big. So he shook his head. "I'm not done," he said softly. The room fell quiet again. He told them about the threats, the nights he'd wake up to, banging on his windows, the cars that followed him for blocks, the letters slipped into his mailbox with no return address. He spoke about the time he almost left Hollywood for good, packing everything into a bag, ready to disappear. But every time he thought of his mother's words, "Kindness is your armor." Keanu knew kindness alone wouldn't protect him now, but it would protect something bigger, the hope that his fight would matter, that people would see they didn't have to be silent anymore. His lawyer slid a photo across the table. It was Jesse's smile, bright, alive, frozen in time before the darkness took him. Keanu felt tears sting his eyes. He let them fall. He didn't care if the world saw him cry. "This isn't about me," Keanu said, his voice breaking. "It's about every person who thought they were alone, about everyone who was told they were nothing if they didn't play along, about everyone who was laughed at when they said no. I'm still here because I said no, and I will keep saying it, even if it's the last thing I do." Somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a young man clapped once, then stopped, unsure. But the sound cracked the tension like lightning. Soon others joined in, soft at first, then louder. Not everyone clapped. Some watched in fear, some in anger. But the ones who did gave Keanu all the strength he needed to stand tall against the shadows. The judge called for order again, but in that moment, something changed. Keanu wasn't just an actor testifying. He was a symbol of what happens when a man stands up, even when it hurts. Outside, the storm was waiting. Stories would be twisted. Threats would come. But Keanu knew one thing for sure. He had started something they couldn't bury again. The darkness was no longer hidden. It was out in the light now. And light is where truth begins to win. Asterisk. When the judge called the court back to order, the room was different. The air felt heavier but also clearer, as if every secret word spoken in the shadows was now hanging in the open for all to see. Keanu sat up straighter, feeling the weight of every eye on him, but this time, he didn't feel small under it. He felt like a bridge, a quiet place where broken people could stand together without fear. He looked over at the young actors in the back row. Some of them were crying, but their tears were not just from pain anymore. They were from relief, from the sudden taste of freedom they thought they'd never have. The lawyer for Diddy's team stood up again, his voice sharp like a blade scraping bone. He called Keanu a liar, said he was making it up for attention. He asked if Keanu could prove who slipped the letters under his door, if he had footage, photos, contracts. Keanu let him talk. He listened to every insult, every word meant to cut him down. When the lawyer finally stopped, Keanu leaned forward. "The proof," Keanu said, his voice low but clear, "is in the fear you see in this room. It's in the broken dreams, the lost lives, the empty chairs where people should be. It's in the stories that keep repeating, over and over, because no one has the courage to break the chain. Well, the chain is broken now," the lawyer scoffed, and sat down, whispering to his team. They were already planning damage control, headlines, interviews, fake stories to bury the truth again. But Keanu knew that once truth touches daylight, it grows on its own. They could lie, they could threaten, but they couldn't silence every voice that had found the courage to stand up. The judge thanked Keanu for his words. She said his testimony would remain on record forever. She reminded everyone that the court was a place for facts and justice. But sometimes justice begins with truth. Even when the facts hide in shadows. As the gavel hit the block, people stood up, some clapping softly, some just standing in stunned silence. The young woman who spoke earlier came up to Keanu, her hands shaking as she hugged him. He hugged her back, no words needed. He felt the warmth of that simple human touch, a small moment of kindness, but stronger than any threat waiting outside. Outside the courthouse, the storm was there, just as he expected. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones crowded his face. Questions flew at him like arrows. Are you lying? Are you bitter? Do you regret it? But Keanu stood tall, shoulders back, eyes calm. No, he said. I don't regret speaking the truth. I regret waiting so long. He turned and saw the same men in gray suits by a black car. They stared at him, cold and silent. He knew they would try to twist his story, to buy silence with money or fear. But behind them, something stronger was growing, a line of young people, some holding signs, some just standing together, eyes wide open now. Keanu walked past the reporters and went straight to them. He stopped in front of a boy no older than 20, who looked at him with shaky hope. Are you scared? The boy asked. Keanu nodded. Yes, he said. But courage isn't about having no fear. It's about standing up even when you do. The boy smiled, and for Keanu, that was worth more than any blockbuster film, any award, any empty promise whispered behind gold doors. He walked away from the courthouse with the sun breaking through the clouds. The shadows would come. Again, they always do. But now, he knew he wasn't alone in the fight. His words were out there, carried in every young person who would stand up tomorrow, and the day after that. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is tell the truth when everyone wants him silent. Sometimes the greatest power is not what you keep but what you give away. Your kindness, your story, your voice. Keanu didn't just walk away as an actor that day. He walked away as a man who proved that no matter how dark the room, even one small light can make the darkness run. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that Jesse, Marissa, and every soul who never got to tell their truth were watching him. And finally, they were free too.